Alright, let's move on to the next presentation. Mr. Kusuaji, a study on primary English education in some selected schools in the Hiroshima Prefecture and Ganjanera Regency, Central Java.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the time given to me for presenting my master thesis entitled A Study on Primary English Education in Some Selected Schools in Hiroshima Prefecture and Banjarnegara Regency, Central Java, under the guidance of Professor Hayashi, Professor Ikeda, and also Associate Professor Shimizu. So there are at least 6 important points to describe for today's. So let's begin from the background of my study. So talking about primary English education in Indonesia and in Japan, I have to say that this kind of policy is quite new. So Japan itself introduced primary English education in 2000, while Indonesia did it in 1993. But in the term of time, I tend to say that both of the countries still have short kind of experience in implementing this kind of curricula. And recently, in April 2011, the government of Japan, I mean the Ministry of Education in Japan, have already decided that English considered to be the compulsory language activities, especially for grade 5 and 6 students. While in Indonesia, English lesson is still considered as a kind of optional subject, optional local content subjects. And I do my study, of course, with a hope that my study will be useful both for teachers and for the government. So for teachers, I believe that the result of my research will be a kind of ways for teachers to improve the quality of English teaching process based on the findings on the observed English classes. And it is hopefully inspiring the ministries of the both countries to be wiser in developing the primary English education through a number of activities such as teacher training, research programs, or maybe learning material development projects. So here is the objective and the research methodology. So basically, my research intended to describe both the intended and the implemented curricula. So for the intended curricula, I try to analyze the national guideline of primary English education both in Indonesia and in Japan by using document analysis. And I also try to know the background of teachers in some selected schools in Hiroshima Prefecture and in Banjarnegara Regency who has a job to teach English. Was done by survey, and I used a questionnaire. And then the last one, to know the real process of teaching learning, I did a number of classroom observation. And here is the ultimate goal of my study, that is to find out the commonality and the uniqueness of the two curricula for proposing the effective teaching. So, like other research, ladies and gentlemen, my research also have a scope and also delimitation. So I have already mentioned that my study only focusing on 2 things. the intended and the implemented one. So it didn't really talk about the students' achievement or the attained curricula. And then because it is a kind of case study, so the result cannot generalize the whole picture of primary English education in the two areas. And here is the result and discussion. So I'd like to explain briefly a little bit about the objective of primary English curricula in Japan. So basically, children will have a basic foundation of communication skills by getting the English activities program at schools. And here, the students mainly learn about two language skills, listening and speaking. So the teachers didn't really deal with the teaching of reading nor writing. And in a year, the students in Japan have to study 35 classes or lessons. And the time is 45 minutes per meeting or per week. And here, the students have to learn a total of 285 English words and 50 expressions mentioned in the textbook issued by the Max called Egonoto. While the primary English curriculum in Indonesia, I can say that the aim is quite similar to those in Japan, that is to give the basic communication skills to the children, and then, but the scope of learning is wider than those in Japan. Here, the students have to learn 4 language skills from listening to the simple writing, and then they have also to learn the element of language like grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and spelling. And the last one, the student also have to practice how to use the language function in daily life, dealing with school and also home. And Table 1 shows you the competency standard and the basic competence for grade 5 and 6 students of Indonesia. So I have to mention that Indonesian primary English curricula is called competency standard curricula. So here the student have to achieve a number of competency standard which is developed into a number of basic competence like what you have seen on the screen. And after comprehensively analyzing the two curricula, I can note some similarities. The first one is the goal. So developing basic communication skills is very recommended here. And then the responsibility of schools and teachers in the implementation of the curriculum is also the same. So here the school has to set up the teaching syllabus while the teachers have to make lesson plans and also delivering the lesson. And then the number of English lesson itself is also the same. In a year, students in Japan and Indonesia have to learn 35 lessons. And then the element of language, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and spelling are also taught. And based on the textbook analysis and also Egonoto books issued by Max, I found out 13 same topics in the textbook. And table 3 shows you the differences between the two curricula based on the document analysis. So the first I have mentioned about the history. So Indonesia is a little bit earlier introducing the primary English education, and the name and its status also different. In Japan, we call compulsory English activities, while in Indonesia, we call English lesson as an optional local content subject. And then focus of skill, it is very clear in Japan, only demanding listening and speaking, while in Indonesia, all language skills have to be mastered by the students. And then the time allocation, Japan has shorter period of study, that is 45 minutes per meeting, while in Indonesia, students will learn English for 80 minutes per meeting. And the learner age also different. So in Indonesia, students from grade 4 are recommended to study English. And then different topics also found in the textbook. And then here, the collaboration of teachers with the community personnel is very clearly implemented in Japanese schools. So we call this team teaching practice by involving the assistant language teacher. While in Indonesia, the teachers themselves teach English. And talking about the textbook and teaching guide, the Max already issued the textbook and the teaching guide. But in Indonesia, the teachers are free to choose from the private companies' textbooks. And the last one is the evaluation method. In Japan, teachers don't have any responsibility to give any kind of paper test to the students. But in Indonesia, students have to have a final examination and something like that. And here, talking about the background of English teachers in Hiroshima Prefecture selected schools, I have to say that most of the teachers here are the holders of bachelor degree in primary school education. So they are not English teachers at all. And then the status here, 92.60% are homeroom teachers, whose jobs are teaching almost all subjects. And about the teaching experience, most of the teachers have 0 to 2 year teaching experience in English. And then 85.19% of the teachers agree to the idea of the introduction of English to the primary school students, in which 55.56% of them said that grade 1 is the best time for starting the English lesson, while 29.63% said that I think grade 5 is the best one. While one teacher disagreed with the idea of the primary English education. And then when being asked about the satisfaction of their English teaching, so most of the teachers felt rather satisfied. So they are not real satisfied. And only 7.40% feel very satisfied. And 89.29% apply the communicative approach in teaching English, while the others combining with other approaches. And then in selecting the teaching material, 39.29% of the teachers following the school syllabus and also considering the pupil interest. That's the case of Hiroshima Prefecture selected schools. And here is the background of the English teachers in Banjarnegara Regency selected schools. So from the data questionnaire, 40% of the teachers are the holder of diploma degree in primary school education. So with 2 years in selfish teacher training. And only 17.5% are the holder of bachelor degree in English education. And the status here, most of the teachers work as subject teachers. I mean the English teachers, so they only teach English. And then the teaching experience is similar to those in Japan. So most of the teachers have 0 to 2 years teaching experience. And then all of the teachers, of course, agree to the idea of the private English education. And then only 47.50% felt satisfied with the teaching, and etc. So here is the characteristic of primary English lesson for grade 5 and 6 that I got recently in school A and school B, C, and D. So there are similarities and differences. The similarities as follows. The use of native language as a medium of instruction. So in Japan, teachers still use Japanese to explain the lesson. In Indonesia, they use Bahasa Indonesia in explaining the lesson also. And the use of oral method is very clear here. So teachers mainly make the students practice and make production word or sentences. And the step of teaching is also similar from opening to the closing. And the use of listening practice for the warming up activity is found especially in grade 6. And textbook is as a main source of teaching material. And the high frequency of repetition or drill activity is very demanding. Vocabulary and formula were mainly taught, and the black or whiteboard was effectively used by the teachers to making notes. And then the exercise began with group works, then individually. And in short, students were active. And the differences is as follows. So the instructors is very clear. In Japanese school, the teachers are accompanied by the ALT, assistant language teacher, while in Banjarnegara Regency School, English teachers himself or herself teach English. Time allocation is very clear, and then classroom seating. So some classes use rows and column with an ISL, while the other use traditional rows and column like this class you have enjoyed. And then about the teaching media, school in Japan have complete media like tape recorder, LCD, pictures, and etc. While in school in B and C, I'm afraid that they just use real object like the books on the table or the pictures on the wall or something like that. And then the form of exercise in Japanese classroom is very clear, only spoken, while in school B and C, both written and oral. The use of chants is very much practiced by the Japanese classrooms, while in school B and C, there is no chants being used. And the uses of games is also, so Japanese teachers are very good in manipulating games to teach English, while in Banjarnegara Regency, the teachers just using lecturing method in teaching English. And the nature of feedback in Japanese classroom, teachers mostly use praise like good, well done, subarashi, something like that, and prize by giving stickers to the student who have done right. But in school B and C, only prize. And from the observation, I can summarize the merit or the good point and the demerit inferred from the observed English lesson. So the merit is as follows. In school A, like that. In school BC, like that. So the conclusion here, so there are at least 5 similarities of the Japanese and Indonesian primary school curricula, and then the most common problem is the qualified teachers. And the next one is, it is evident that team teaching by involving the ILT is commonly practiced in Japanese classroom. Thank you very much.
Please make a comment or question.
Sorry. One of my question is, if in Indonesia you can choose from different textbooks,
Yes.
The textbooks that you analyze represent what is the characteristics of the textbook you analyze in the core textbooks used in Indonesia? This is one question.
Yes.
The other is a comment. You say grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and spelling in parallel. But according to my understanding, in teaching vocabulary, we have to teach form, meaning, and usage together. And pronunciation and spelling is included in form of vocabulary. So it's quite strange for me that you put grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and spelling in parallel.
Okay, thank you very much for the question, Hirakawa-sensei. For the first question, talking about the English textbook, so Indonesia already published the guideline. And here the publisher can infer to the guideline to publishing the textbook. So here I use the textbook which is commonly used by the teachers in schools in Banjarnegara Regencies. So in which most of the teachers use the textbook. And then talking about the vocabulary here, I think you are right, but according to my observation, when the teachers teach vocabulary, they don't use kind of sentences, sensei. Just repeat, something like that. Maybe because it is in primary level. And talking about the grammar, when the students have to learn language function, for example, how they say permission to the teachers, so mainly the teachers will give the sentence pattern on the blackboard and then ask the students to repeat the sentences one by one, something like that.
If so, it should be that vocabulary in parentheses, especially pronunciation and spelling, not meaning and usage.
Yes, that's what I want to.
So you should not say grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and spelling.
Okay, sensei. Thank you. A good idea.
I just have one comment and one question. So number 5, slide 5, sorry, says to find out the commonality and uniqueness of the two curricula for proposing ideal effective teaching. I just wonder if commonality and uniqueness are necessary components for ideal and effective teaching. For example, if you took two really low-achieving education systems and found commonalities, would that equal effective teaching? That's one comment. And second, I have a question about your survey. You said that 92% of the teachers in the survey were homeroom teachers. I'm just curious. I think in Hiroshima there's 3 teachers in the classroom. So one is the homeroom teacher,